What's going on, everybody? We have the meta snapshot for patch 13.13c. There was a C patch. This was supposed to be a 3-week patch, but they did make a couple of changes here and there. So Ezreal got nerfed. They removed the gold from buried treasures. Tiny grab bag got nerfed, big grab bag got nerfed, and giant grab bag got nerfed. And they nerfed Kai'Sa's mana, Lux's mana, Lux's damage, and they fixed 2 bugs which were very crucial. So this actually completely flipped the meta because we've been playing in 4-cost meta, but now it's reroll time, baby. All right, so Akshan Reroll, Noxus Reroll, and Zed Reroll gonna be taking the dominating spots in the S tier right now. Because of the nerfs to both the Ionia comp and the Strategist comps, we have the new kings out there. And keep in mind, whenever you do reroll comps, the more people that play reroll comps, the better they even become. So right now we're in one of those states where a lot of the rerolls are just like snowballing each other to even greater heights. So that's why we have this kind of combination up here right now. But we'll get into how to play every single one of these comps after we go through this first list. In the A tier, Ravenous Warwick still very powerful if you get the augment, but only if you get that. Double Trouble Taliyah, another reroll comp bumping up. Challengers and Void Kai'Sa, they're just 2 Kai'Sa builds, still pretty solid. Kayle Reroll, this is a new comp that we just added. Ionia Yasuo, same thing as before. Strategist Azir nerfed, of course. Deadeye, still mediocre, probably not your first choice. Tristana Reroll, still a solid option. Sorcerers, Multicaster Reroll, and Shurima, that's going to be the A tier. Pretty much just stick within the S and A tiers right now. B tier, we have Ekko, Gunners, Kalista, Karma, Riftwalker, Kassadin, Rogue, Garen, Demacia, and Built Different. But let's move on into the Legend tier list because that changed a bunch of things too. So right now, probably like Poro, Vladimir, and Ornn are going to be your go-tos. Ezreal got nerfed. Ezreal was by far the best before, but I think whenever like a big change happens, you kind of just like relax a little bit. Maybe with all the re-rolling going on, maybe Lee Sin comes back. Lee Sin's always good in those metas, but I think he mainly revolves more around 1-cost re-roll. But who knows? Maybe Trade Sector is pretty good for this other stuff. Maybe I need to put Lee Sin up a bit more. But all in all, Legends don't really make that much of a difference. It's just kind of doing whatever you're comfortable with. It's like when you're deciding what to eat for lunch. Some people like tacos, some people like hamburgers, some people like eating with a knife and fork, who knows. But let's move on into the comps. Let's start off with Akshan Reroll. So the best part about Akshan Reroll, because it is like one of the quote-unquote newer comps that we're adding, is that it's very similar to the Deadeye comp, which is pretty much just a Freljord build with Deadeye. So in this comp here, you just have Akshan with 2 Deadeye with the Ashe, and then you add in Sejuani and Lissandra. Lissandra's a really good addition because she's a 3-cost unit, so when you're doing a 3-cost reroll with Akshan and Lissandra, it makes it a little easier to hit. Also, since other people are going for stuff like Noxus Reroll, it makes it even more easier to hit. Main tank's gonna be Sejuani, but you could transfer onto Sion in the super late game, and then Nasus and Jarvan just gonna be some other dudes to put in just so you could get Shurima in, and also Strategist from the Jarvan. Azir is still played here, but Azir is not important. He's really just there as a trait bot, which is funny because he used to be the primary carry for like most of the patch. Let's move on into the how to play section. So item holders is going to be Jhin, Samira, and Jinx. Legends, probably Vlad or Poro right now, but it really doesn't matter. Anything that gets you to the comp is going to work pretty well. And whenever like Poro is kind of usable, pretty much any Legend's good. It just depends on your play style. But on the how to play section, and you can access this on BunnyMuffins.lol/meta, and you'll see here it's a 3-cost reroll comp, so you want to get to level 7 and then slow roll for 3 stars. However, it's not as simple as that, because if that was how TFT was played, it would be very easy of a game and everyone would be good, which means no one's good. So how do you get better than that? You go into the how to get there section. So to get there, you pretty much play strongest board and build up your economy. Sometimes that means rolling on stage 3, or sometimes it means completely sacrificing your early game and going on a full lose streak. Then you could stabilize either on 3-2 at level 6 or at level 7 at 3-5, depending on how your economy in the early game played out, and then stabilize with Akshan 2-star and maybe Lissandra and other units. I think I'm leaning more towards the level 7 at 3-5 roll down and going like all the way to 0 because you don't have that much gold at that point in the game, mainly because getting 4 costs is pretty important. If you look at the comp up here, you're really only playing 2 3-cost units and 1 2-cost unit, so all the other units, they're pretty expensive, so you'd rather roll at level 7 than level 6. So that kind of makes this different from, let's say, the Kai'Sa Recon build that we saw in the last set, where Kai'Sa was a 3-cost unit, but you stabilize at level 6. For items, I think Runon's Hurricane is probably the best item for Akshan. I've seen even people do like double Runons or even triple Runons. After that, Deathblade just complements Runon so well, so you always want to pair these 2 items together. Third item doesn't really matter. It could be a second Runon, second Deathblade, or just any generic damage item, or even like a healing item if you really want it. and that's going to complete out your Akshan. For Lissandra, I think Morella Namicon is probably very important, and then just any generic AP after that. Nothing too complicated there. You just put leftover items onto her. And then for tank items, just any generic tank items will do on like Nasus, Jarvan, or Sejuani. The augments that are going to be best for this comp are a bunch of the reroll augments, so Golden Ticket and Cruel Pact, very powerful. Shurima's Legacy is just broken in general. Anything that increases your stats is going to be pretty good. And then like Lesser Duplicator, this army building one, is pretty decent because you're really going hard for those 3-cost 3-stars, and sometimes you don't hit them every game without some help. But let's move on into the next build, which is going to be Noxus Reroll. So Noxus Reroll, we've seen this comp before. It's nothing new, but it rose up in power in the meta. It used to be A tier, now it's going to be S tier, and the reason why is because rerolling just got a lot easier, and all the comps that it was worse than all got nerfed. So this is kind of the one that's like the last man standing, and it bumped all the way up to the S tier. Pretty much just itemize your Darius and Katarina. You have a very high cap in this build because you have a lot of 3-cost units to go for 3-star, and Swain is also an incredible tank at 2 costs, and if you get Swain 3-star, that's just the icing on the cake. But Darius and Katarina just use all the damage items in the game, and hopefully they blow everything up. To play this build, having a Noxus +1 is really good because it allows you to stay at level 7 while being able to hit 6 Noxus, Rogue, and Juggernaut. If you don't have it, you have to get to level 8 somehow, and that could be a difficult thing to balance, especially if you are trying to get everyone 3-star, but also trying to play all the synergies to activate your units. But it's pretty much just basic 3-cost reroll. You could click the leveling guide here if you have trouble like knowing like when to reach each level. The only thing I'd say that's important about this comp is making sure that you're able to get Noxus stacks, because getting like even just 1 or 2 stacks in the early game before you stabilize helps your team tremendously, because then you could get to max stacks really easily after that. One advantage of this build is that it could make use of both attack damage and ability power items, because both Darius and Katarina like both of those stats, so it's pretty easy to fit all the items. The only thing you don't really like are tank items. Like, yeah, you could put tank items on Ekko, Sion, or Swain, but you're really trying to find like 3 perfect items for both Darius and Katarina. But moving on into the next build, we have the Zed Reroll build. So this comp just rose up because everything else got nerfed, and because everyone's playing reroll now, but the power of this comp is really dependent on whether it is contested or not. If it's uncontested, it's probably one of the best comps in the game. If it is contested, you're going to run into a little bit of trouble. Not to say it's bad, you could probably still top 4 with it, but it's not going to be as dominant as it was before. It pretty much plays the same as the Darius build, except you just put the Darius items onto your Zed. So if you're playing the game and you slam a lot of the Zed and Katarina items, and then you realize like, hey, I have like 0 Zeds, maybe go for the Darius build. But if you're like, hey, I got a lot of Zeds, obviously go for the Zed build and do the 2-cost reroll strategy. This revolves around staying level 6 and rolling for Zed 3-star there. Or what you can do is a little more advanced, but you could kind of get like 7 copies of Zed, then level up to level 7, and then find both Zed and Katarina at that point in the game. It's a little trickier to do, but sometimes it works out really well. Having 1 econ augment for maybe Zed reroll or even the Darius reroll is very helpful, because sometimes you just don't have enough gold to find all the units to 3-star. But with 1 econ augment, it's generally you're able to do it. I say for 2-cost reroll, like 1 good econ augment generally allows you to hit everything. And then for 3-cost reroll, you either have 1 econ augment and you get a little lucky, or you have like 2 econ augments and then you pretty much guarantee hit. But yeah, gonna be a lot of melee carries so far in this patch, mainly because these 2 comps are kind of the mainstays, or like these 3 comps. Moving on into the A tier, we have Ravenous Warwick, another reroll comp, but this one was something that was always dependent on getting the Warwick augment, which is called Ravenous Hunter. Do not play this without Ravenous Hunter, because it's useless to do so otherwise. Just stack challengers and then stack your Warwick, like 2 defensive items, or like 1 defensive, 1 healing item plus 1 damage item is going to do. Defensive as in Quicksilver, RFC, or like Bloodthirster, Edge of Night, things like that. Anything that gives him some sort of survivability is going to work, but you want 2 of those plus 1 damage item to really get Warwick to pop off. Since you're re-rolling for 2-cost units, Set's a great unit to complement him with, and then just put your tank items on Set, and then in the late game, Yasuo or Kaisa can hold kind of your leftover items, depending on who you 2-star or what items you have. Pretty simple build, just do 2-cost reroll and get him up to 3-star. Next build up we have is a Taliyah reroll, another 2-cost reroll build. This one revolves around having Double Trouble, and Double Trouble makes this comp like exponentially stronger, but you could still play it without it as long as you get all the 3 stars for free. If you do end up getting those units, you could just sub in random substitutions, such as adding Shurima for Taliyah, or adding in Ionias to help your set, or getting up to 4 multicasters by adding in Sona and Vel'Koz. That's kind of what you're going to do if you do not have Double Trouble, but with Double Trouble, it's very, very powerful. Pretty much for this comp though, you just stay level 6 the entire game until you hit everything 3-star. Then you just power level to throw in random units. But really, once you get Taliyah 3, Set 3, Teemo 3, Swain 3, you don't really need to worry about anything else. Taliyah items, I like probably going like triple damage on her, or having like 1 mana regen items pretty decent. Nothing too much crazy going on there. Set's going to be your main tank, and then you can put support items or damage items onto your Teemo. Next build up we have is Challengers. Challengers is pretty much just the Kai'Sa Yasuo build, but instead of going 6 Ionia, you go 6 Challenger instead. It's just a cheaper version of the comp, cheaper as in like less expensive because you're running stuff like Samira and Warwick, but it's still very solid overall and great to stabilize with and kind of carry you into the late game. But since the comp got nerfed, it got a little weaker. You just do standard leveling for this. I think now, since less people are going to go for all the 4-cost builds, fast aiding might be a little bit better than rolling down on 7, because we used to do like donkey rolling on 7, but I think now that it's like kind of a different meta, you could kind of just fast aid and hit all the 4 costs there. Moving on into the next build, we have Void Kai'Sa. Void Kai'Sa is going to be still a solid build, but I only like playing Void with a +1 Void augment just because the comp gets like exponentially stronger. You pretty much just bump it up a tier whenever you get it. But even with the Kai'Sa nerfs, it's still a very powerful comp because the Rift is still good, the Baron Nashor is still good, and it always has a good late game cap with having Bel'Veth holding some nutty items. And overall, Kai'Sa is still a good character. Think about it, when like 3.5 players were going for Kai'Sa, even if they nerf it, it could still support a lot of players. And if you hit Kai'Sa 2-star much easier now, it's just going to be that much better for you. But yeah, standard leveling for this, same logic as before. Probably fast aiding going to work a bit better than just rolling down on 7, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't stabilize on 7. You're just not rolling as hard for specifically Kai'Sa, Yasuo, and things like that. But with the Void comp, you're really just trying to get as many Voids in as possible. There's huge difference between 3 and 6 Void, and even bigger difference between 6 and 8 Void. So you really just want to play around that and add complementary traits to whoever your main carry is. So in the early game, if you're carrying like Malzahar, maybe you play like Swain or Orianna to give Sorcerer or Taric. And then if you're carrying Vel'Koz, same thing, but maybe add in a Sona or Teemo for multicaster. And then of course, if you're carrying Kai'Sa, add in random challengers to kind of make her attack a bit faster. But apart from that, just staying at the 3 or 6 Void threshold, it's going to be what's going to be carrying you, because the Void trait, they don't power up the Void units, they only power up the little thing that spawns. Onto the next build, we have Kayle Reroll. Very popular build recently. So if you get a little lucky, this build is just like so incredibly powerful. You get Kayle 3-star and then like Maokai Poppy 3-star, and then you just power level up and hope that you can stabilize at level 7, and then with that, reach level 9, and then Kayle just shreds through everything. Vladimir is actually really good for this build because you end up losing a ton of health, so your units get a bunch of bonus health from Vladimir's augment. So that's kind of one way to kind of play this build, but I wouldn't attempt this unless you have a lot of copies of Kayles and Poppies in the early game, because it's not really worth going deep into otherwise. The great part about this build is that you don't really need to add in actual units at level 7 or 8, so you don't have to spend a lot of gold rolling at those levels to kind of stabilize. Instead, what you can do is just save up your gold going fast 9 and then buffing up your Kayle a lot. Next point I want to make is adding a lot of Slayers really helps out your team a ton, obviously, so Kled, Gwen, and Zed are going to be added in, hopefully Aatrox later on, because you really just care about your Kayle damage, and then Poppy with decent items and maybe the Radiant item should buy enough time for Kayle to really ramp up. But just do 1-cost reroll for this. There's a very specific leveling pattern that people use for 1-cost reroll. It pretty much just means like rolling down to 30 gold at stage 3-1 instead of just doing a pure slow roll at level 5 all the time. Another thing to note is that in this reroll build, you don't care about any other 3-stars other than Kayle and Poppy and Maokai, but as long as you have 3 3-star units, you don't care about Galio, Kled, Teemo, or Zed 3-star, you just level up and go level 9 instead, because that's where most of your power is going to be coming from. It's not going to be coming from like other units being 3-star. Items for Kayle, Guinsoo's Rageblade going to be by far the best, Rapid Fire Cannon a quick second, and then just any like sustain item is great for Kayle just in case she gets blown up, because you really need her to stay alive when she has those Rageblades stacked. Next build up we have is Yasuo Ionia. We need to teach people how to play this comp, right? Just kidding, we've been playing this pretty much the whole patch, so you should be able to at least know most of what this comp kind of revolves around. But overall, it's still a pretty solid build. A lot of games, I don't even get Kai'Sa 2-star. So it's like, yeah, in the games where I get lucky, I'm not going to get first place as easily. But in all the other games where I top 4 in, where I don't even have a copy of Kalista, those games are still going to happen because I like playing like Karma carry a bunch. Kalista carry can stabilize you all the way until stage 5. So honestly, even though these comps got nerfed, it's not going to be that bad because we could all count the amount of games where like we didn't hit because everyone's contesting the same comp. So it's really not even that bad of a nerf. But overall, still a solid comp. Lots of different ways to play this. Some people have been experimenting with different items. Like I see a lot of like RFCs on Yasuo, just so he like CCs the backline all the time. It really depends on who like your main damage dealers are. I think in the mid game, having a damage Yasuo is much better, but in the late game, having the RFC Yasuo is a bit better compared to the bruiser items at least. So it kind of changes depending on the state of the game. But overall, still a very solid comp. I'm still going to be playing this when possible. Next up is Strategist Azir and Lux. Same story there. Azir didn't even get touched. I think it was only Lux that got nerfed. Yeah, looking at it, Lux just got her first cast nerf, but that's fine because I often overbuild mana on her anyways. For example, if you put a blue buff on her, she'll still cast right away. This is actually more of a direct nerf to something like Spear of Shojin. Obviously, the damage nerf is going to hurt a little bit, but since Azir's untouched, like this comp still should be very powerful. Same story with the other 4-cost unit builds is that you probably want to do standard leveling still, but instead of rolling on level 7, maybe go level 8 a little more often than you did before. It depends on the pace of the game though. If other people are strong, you need to roll, but if they're not, then you could kind of get away with a fast 8 and use that to kind of survive during stage 4. Same items as before, nothing's really changed, but I guess for Lux, blue buff may be a little bit more important than Spear of Shojin because of the way that the mana works. But honestly, I don't even think about items in this comp. I just slam all my items, and as long as they're like even remotely usable for either Lux, Azir, or Nasus, or Jarvan, I just build them in the early game and just use them like that. Next build up we have is Deadeye. This is just like an Aphelios carry comp. Not as strong as everything else before. Akshan comp probably a bit stronger, but you could play the Akshan Reroll build in this build too. Like there are kind of 2 versions of it. So we have this version here with 4 Deadeye. The other version before is 2 Deadeye, but it has 3 Shurima. But both builds work. It doesn't really matter which one you do, as long as you hit all the units that you actually care about. For Aphelios, I like having Rageblade and then just pure AD items like Deathblade, maybe a healing item in Hodge. IE is also pretty decent. There's a lot of different things you could go for. Urgot, I think, might be a little overrated. Maybe we want to just itemize Aphelios and Akshan, and then have one of the tanks, either Sejuani or Shen, whoever you 2-star first, and maybe put Urgot on the back burner for a little bit right now. But same standard, like leveling comp. Probably not many people are going to be playing this, but they might be taking your Akshans and the Akshan Reroll. Next up we have is Tristana Reroll. Tristana Reroll is still very powerful. I personally love this comp as like a pocket comp. Like sometimes you just get the starts for it and you get a ridiculous amount of Tristanas in the early game, and then people are wondering how you hit so early, and they're like, oh my god, this guy's like a Tristana one trick. But nope, I'm not. I just play Tristana when I get really good starts for her, and that's how I tried to make it work at least. Still a very solid comp. I think Rageblade plus healing item's pretty decent. Then third item can be like any damage item or like a Last Whisper. Really just depends on what you need. Generic tank items on Maokai, and then leftover items on like Viego or maybe your Zeri or Senna in the late game. But reaching the late game isn't really that important because you just need to hit Tristana 3-star early on, and if you do that, like getting the late game is no problem anyways. Let's move on into the next build, which is Sorcerers. Sorcerers, still pretty solid. Obviously, Lux got nerfed. They didn't get any compensation buffs, but I think it's still okay. Vel'Koz is a great like intermediate carry in the mid game. So using Vel'Koz as like an item holder for your Lux definitely gets you a lot of top 4s without even needing to hit Lux 2-star. For tanks, Jarvan's going to be probably the main one, but you could also do Taric. There's also other versions of this build with Void and Kassadin, so you could play this same exact build you see here, but instead play it with like a +1 Sorcerer, either through an emblem or through like a Sorcerer Heart, and then you just add in Kassadin to get both Void and Bastion. It's pretty decent, and it's also something to play in the early to mid game if you don't get this exact front line like you see here. But standard leveling for this one, I say rolling on 7 is very good for Sorcerers because there are a lot of 3-cost units that you're kind of using to stabilize. So I think like rolling at level 7 is a little more important for Sorcerers than it is for like the Azir and the Kai'Sa builds, especially since you're not that dependent on Lux. Like, yeah, obviously she's going to be better than Vel'Koz, but you don't need to hit 2-star 4-cost in early stage 4. Next up we have is the Multicaster Reroll. So this one is like Sona and Vel'Koz carry. Pretty similar to the Sorcerer build because we're still running a lot of Sorcerers. It's just using different types of carries. and you just do 3-cost reroll for that. Not too many people are playing this, so it's a little uncontested, but definitely not as powerful as some of the other comps we went through before. Shurima, still pretty solid. They didn't really get touched at all, and probably less people are going to be taking Azir, so it might be easier to play this comp, but people are taking your Akshans. But if you do a duo carry with Azir Nasus or Azir Akshan, probably going to be still pretty solid of a build, and personally, I might be trying to play only Shurima on this patch, just for fun, just as an experiment. But same standard leveling bullcrap that we talked about before, and then you just need good items on your Azir. If you ever get like some of the augments called like, I don't have it written down here, but it's called, it's the Shurima augment that like shoots a beam from the Shurima thing. If you ever get that, like this build is just so powerful. That might be one of the best augments in the game right now. In the B tier, we're just going to go over these really quickly because I don't think you should be playing any of the B tier right now unless you get a completely free game for them. But Ekko Reroll still pretty solid with like JG, double Hodge. Let's see, Gunners still okay if you get a Piltover start. So if you get Piltover on stage 2-1 and then you lose streak with it perfectly, Gunners are going to be incredibly good and you're going to win a lot of games with it. But is it because Gunners are good or is it because Piltover is good? I think it's because Piltover gets you a giant T-Hex that kind of destroys everything. Kalista Reroll, still pretty solid. I actually like this build a lot. I think it's actually pretty underrated. You just build Rageblade on her. And Karma Reroll. I play Karma Reroll more so in the Ionia build rather than the Invoker build. So not too much crazy going on there. But I guess it's just like slightly different in terms of how you build Karma. In the Invoker build, you focus on damage items. And in the Ionia build, you put like a Spear of Shojin on her plus 2 damage items. Next build up we have is Riftwalker Kassadin. Only play this with the Riftwalker Kassadin augment. Definitely not as good as Warwick, but still pretty solid. That's why we put it up here. I think the other 2-cost hero augments are not as powerful, apart from Riftwalker and Ravenous Hunter. But maybe in the next patch that kind of changes because I'm assuming they want all of them to be kind of viable. But I kind of like the concept. It seems pretty interesting, keeping hero augments like half alive. But JG, double Hodge, or JG, Hodge, and QSS going to be very solid for your Kassadin. Next build up we have is Rogue Reroll. 4 Rogue just kind of sucks, not gonna lie. So I prefer the other Zed builds where it's just like 2 Rogue and then adding more Slayers. And since Zed's gonna be contested, this build's gonna be a little weak relative to how it was before. Garen Reroll, okay, nothing crazy. Next up we have Demacia. Demacias just haven't really been that great of a comp quite yet. I guarantee you they're gonna be buffing Demacia somehow in the next patch. I don't know how they're gonna do it. Maybe they increase the armor that the Demacian units get, or maybe they buff like, I don't know, Galio or something like that. Next up we have is Build Different. Don't take Build Different right now. I don't think it's that powerful. It's really just a stat check of an augment. Maybe they remove it in future sets. I don't really know because it's hard to balance. It's either the best thing in the world or the worst thing in the world. So it's kind of a weird situation there. Last up we have is Teemo Reroll. We just kind of keep this here for fun, but you probably shouldn't be going for it. If you're going to reroll Teemo, just go Taliyah because she's going to end up doing a lot more work. But summarizing up everything that we went through in this video, it's reroll meta, roll as much as you like. Some people love reroll metas, some people hate them. It's weird. I always get comments saying both things depending on what the meta is. They're like, oh my god, I can't believe it's reroll time. Or like, oh my god, I can't believe it's like only 4-cost carry, only standard leveling. And it's just like, you know, it's going to change every now and then. It's just the nature of the game. Ideally, the best patches are when like everything is like equally viable. Like, yeah, you just have to have the right spot for everything, and that's probably like the best state of the game, but it's pretty hard to get there. But right now, it's just focusing on rerolls, and then rerolls snowball each other to make each other even stronger, especially the Akshan and Noxus rerollers. So that's pretty much just what we're dealing with right now. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and yeah, you guys saw correctly. This is a bonus early video. Normally I post on Fridays, but this one is a little earlier because there was a big change and I want everyone to be prepared for this entire C patch. But that's going to be it for me today. Hopefully you all enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time.